Clerk has established we have a quorum. First item on the agenda is approval of the October 16, 2023 minutes. The Vice Chair first motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the October 16th minutes.
Have a motion, do I hear a second? Somebody second? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. I appear to have, your motion approved. This time we have presentation from Byrd on the Department of Education managing the American Rescue Plan Fund.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Brandon Burton, and I'm a research manager for the Performance Evaluation and Research Division. I will be providing a summary of our review of the Department of Education's oversight of local education agencies' federal COVID spending.
Thank you. May have to speak up just a little loud.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. The West Virginia Department of Education, or WVDE, has received nearly $1.2 billion in elementary and secondary schools emergency relief, or ESSER funds, through 3 separate federal acts to support safe reopening of schools and recover from the effects of the 2019 coronavirus pandemic on the academics, social, emotional, and mental health of the students. A stipulation of receiving these funds is for the WVDE to implement an adequate capacity for appropriate fiscal monitoring, internal and internal control over the use of the funds to ensure they are used for allowable purposes and to guard against potential sources of waste, fraud, and abuse. PERD ultimately finds that the WVDE implemented a fiscal monitoring and internal control system. However, its capacity is inadequate for ensuring proper use of ESSER funds, and the structure lacks specific criteria that should be reviewed in all cases. Consequently, there are violations the system is not detecting. Table 2, which can be found on page 14 of the report, indicates the amount of ESSER funding from each act, and as of October 6, 2023, the amount of monies unspent. Nearly 100% of ESSER 1 monies have been spent, and over 86% of ESSER 2 monies have been spent. Over $467 million in ARP ESSER monies have yet to be spent, with the expiration deadline being September 30th, 2024 for those funds. Any unspent monies are expected to revert to the United States Department of Education, or the USDOE. The USDOE required each state to submit a state plan by June 7th, 2021 for its intended use of the ARP ESSER funds. West Virginia submitted its state plan within the required timeframe. The state plan proposed a fiscal monitoring and internal control system for all ESSER funds, allowing the WVDE to conduct oversight of federal COVID expenditures by the county school districts. The state plan from WVDE proposed a fiscal monitoring system that consists of 6 components. After review, PERD noted that in each instance, WVDE has adhered to its proposed plan. Of interest to PERD was WVDE's utilization of cyclical monitoring. Cyclical monitoring includes a review of whether a local education agency, or LEA, spent funds on allowable activities, followed proper purchasing procedures, and has a policy for internal control. Cyclical monitoring conducted by the Office of Federal Programs, or OFP, is essentially a desk review of information that LEAs are required to upload and that the OFP obtains from other sources. OFP reported during monitoring, we receive and review transaction activity reports that contain 100% of the current activity on the grant award. From these reports, we then select a sample of transactions to request supporting documentation for. WVDE's fiscal monitoring system identified numerous violations of unallowable expenditures and improper purchasing procedures. Between May 2022 and March 2023, The OFP reviewed over $27 million of ESSER 1 purchases made by LEAs. Of the 54 LEAs reviewed, 37 were deemed non-compliant for either improper purchasing procedures, expenditures on unallowable activities, and/or exceeding the indirect cost rate. According to a July 2023 report, the OFP has recovered over $130,000 of ESSER 1 funds from a total of 19 LEAs and $323,302 of ESSER 2 and ARP ESSER funds from the 13 LEAs. These funds were subject to unallowed expenditures such as private school expenses, food, and a choir trip out of state. Of the 29 LEAs that the WVDE determined were compliant with proper purchasing procedures, PURG review of the same transactions found that 7 transactions totaling over $285,000 were non-compliant. Table 4 on page 27 of the report lists the 7 LEAs that the OFP should have deemed non-compliant with the WVDE's purchasing policy, otherwise known as Policy 8200. Most of these LEAs lack bid documentation, and 2 of the samples also dealt with an absence of proper sole source documentation. Collectively, the 7 LEA samples in question contain improperly documented purchases totaling over $285,000. In addition to reviewing proper purchasing procedures, several vendors utilized for ESSER 1 purchases were reviewed by PURG to verify registration with the West Virginia Secretary of State's Business and Licensing Database to determine if LEA were making purchases with vendors qualified to do business in the state of West Virginia. During the review, PURG found the following. Out of all ESSER 1 transactions in the monitoring sample gathered by OFP, a total of $2.1 million was spent by 48 LEAs on 97 different unregistered vendors. 2 of those 97 vendors were located in West Virginia, and 4 of the 97 were based in foreign countries. A complete list of the counties and the number of vendors can be found in Table 5, beginning on page 29 of the report. Title 148 of the Code of State Rules explains procedures for the West Virginia Purchasing Division. Specifically, 148-1-6 states that a vendor must be licensed and in good standing in accordance with any and all state and local laws and requirements by any state or local agency of West Virginia, including the West Virginia Secretary of State's office. However, this is exclusive to all spending units of state government, and LEAs do not fall under this category. Policy 8200 also does not require an LEA to verify whether a vendor is qualified to do business in West Virginia before making a purchase with that vendor. This increases the risk of county school districts incidentally making purchases from fraudulent vendors or those that might be on the state VBAR vendors list. Therefore, the legislative auditor recommends that Policy 8200 and the OFP's cyclical monitoring process incorporate the requirement that LEAs use vendors that are appropriately registered with the Secretary of State and State Tax Department. In its written response to this report, the agency has indicated to PURG that they are already working to implement this recommendation. This slide is an indication of how cyclical monitoring can have an immediate impact and in some instances result in further monitoring. The examples of Upshur County is indicative that other special circumstance reviews could potentially occur going forward as the OFP continues to monitor the final rounds of federal COVID grant purchases over the next several months. With the case of Upshur County, which led to a takeover of the county school district by the State Board of Education, The OFP found several instances of unallowable purchases during cyclical monitoring conducted on ESSER II ARP funds. Most notable expenditures included $21,000 spent on a wildlife center passes and $60,000 spent on pool passes in the summer of 2021. These types of purchases should not have been made with ESSER grants, as the LEA was not able to provide evidence that these activities had an educational or programmatic value. In addition to standard monitoring, the state superintendent of schools authorized a special circumstances review in May of 2023 in response to a letter written on behalf of a concerned citizens group calling for a complete audit of Upshur County schools. While the special review is ongoing, initial findings included $60,000 of unallowable expenditures at restaurants and $75,000 paid to employees without evidence of justification. While the OFP is commended for its findings related to Upshur County, a separate scenario involving Logan County schools demonstrates an example of inadequate monitoring capacity. The OFP's review of Logan County should have flagged a $500,000 contract for virtual education services that did not follow competitive bidding procedures or establish a written contract. In July of 2022, the OFP assigned one person to monitor Logan County's ESSER I activities. A $19,500 invoice for virtual learning vendor was not questioned, despite evidence that it was part of a larger contract of more than $500,000. In addition to standard monitoring, a special circumstance review was launched by the WVDE in September of 2022 in response to complaints about the Logan County Board and central office leadership. Documentation obtained during the special review indicated improper sole source purchasing procedures linked to the same virtual learning vendor that had been reviewed and cleared during ESSER I cyclical monitoring. Like Upshur County, the Logan Special Review resulted in a takeover of the county school districts by State Board of Education, which remains to be the status. As previously discussed during our review, we took a look at all the ESSER I cyclical monitoring reviews completed. As suggested in this slide, as we were wrapping up ESSER II monitoring reviews were being conducted. And these are our findings so far. Preliminary findings from the ESSER II ARP cyclical monitoring report suggest similar issues of non-adherence of purchasing guidelines, with 8 counties being repeat offenders. Initial analysis of ESSER II ARP cyclical monitoring results show that 24 different LEAs received non-compliance citations from OFP monitors for improper purchasing procedures and/or unallowable activities. It is worth noting that no LEA to date has yet to be cited for exceeding the indirect cost rate for ESSER II ARP. This suggests that the WVDE has educated LEAs on the proper method of calculating indirect costs. Several causes are contributing to deficiencies in the WVDE cyclical monitoring process. The WVDE does not have adequate monitoring capacity. 85% of ESSER I monitoring was conducted by 1 to 3 staff members. The fiscal monitoring system lacks appropriate risk assessment. The frequency of improper purchasing procedures and other ESSER grant violations warranted a reassessment of risk and adjustment to the system's capacity and structure. The current monitoring process lacks appropriate structure due to a lack of written policies and procedures for the cyclical monitoring process. The WVDE did not clearly communicate which purchasing procedures LEAs needed to follow during the ESSER I procurement process. Local school districts may have been in the practice of improper purchasing procedures prior to the COVID-19 pandemic due to a lack of monitoring. Of the 54 LEAs reviewed for ESSER I, more than half did not follow proper procurement practices. And in the final analysis, all but 10 reviewed counties had some combination of non-compliance. The evidence of many purchasing violations not being identified suggests that the current capacity for a fiscal monitoring system is inadequate in achieving effective monitoring of ESSER funds. ESSER funds have administrative portions that may be used for employing additional staff for cyclical monitoring. Although the WVDE implemented cyclical monitoring for ESSER grants, its capacity is inadequate. No more than 5 personnel from the OFP were used to conduct the cyclical monitoring of ESSER 1 grants for 54 counties. Proper risk assessment should have prompted the agency to reevaluate the monitoring process due to the prevalence of initial non-compliance findings during the ESSER 1 reviews. And despite the provision within federal law permitting states to increase capacity with administrative funds available through the ESSER grants, the WVDE indicated that it has no intention of increasing capacity since the deadline to spend the last of the ESSER funds is 10 months away. As with West Virginia, other states are beginning to suggest that due to the large amount of money being awarded, the current number assigned to oversight is inadequate, and that in some instances, guidelines for proper procurement are not being followed. PERC found examples of this in multiple reports, all of which are noted on pages 45 through 47 of the report. These prominent examples include a 2020 report by the North Carolina State Auditor found that no monitoring was conducted for federal COVID grants, resulting in an increased risk of misuse of funds. A 2021 report from the California State Auditor found inadequacies in the COVID grant monitoring process, with less than 1% of LEAs being reviewed by the understaffed California Department of Education. Finally, a 2022 report by the Mississippi State Auditor identified a circumstance under which the State Department of Education showed favoritism toward a particular vendor and did not follow proper procurement guidelines, resulting in a potential for civil litigation claims and public distrust of the agency. So ultimately, we have 8 recommendations that I'll quickly go through, and I'll just kind of give you an overview of DOE's response. These are the recommendations. The first 2, WVDE should increase its monitoring and internal controls capacity by assigning more personnel to assist with cyclical monitoring. The second, consideration should be given by the WVDE to use the administrative portion of ESSER funds to hire additional temporary staff to assist in fiscal monitoring. WVDE's response is ultimately that it is not feasible to reassign existing staff to assist with this ESSER cyclical monitoring, and to use existing ESSER funds to hire additional temporary staff. The response was that ESSER funds will expire in 10 months, and it is not feasible to employ additional employees with expertise in financial auditing given this limited time. The third recommendation, the fiscal monitoring process should be established in writing with specifics on what program monitors should examine. Such monitoring instruments should instruct program monitors to examine vendors are registered with the Secretary of State, list every type of purchasing violations that should be reviewed, and specify key aspects of internal controls that must be reviewed. The WVDE has accepted this recommendation and has drafted written procedures that articulate the monitoring responsibilities. The last 4 through 8, WVDE should renew its communication with LEAs to reemphasize proper purchasing procedures. Number 5, the WVDE should routinely review purchasing practices of LEAs during non-emergency conditions to reinforce proper purchasing procedures. Number 6, when appropriate, the WVDE should encourage LEAs to utilize alternative procurement options designed by Policy 8200, such as educational services, cooperatives, and pre-existing state contracts that permit piggybacking. 7 and 8, the WVDE should incorporate in Policy 8200 and in the monitoring instrument for ESSER monitoring the requirement that LEAs use vendors that are appropriately registered with the Secretary of State and the State Tax Department and be authorized to do business in West Virginia. And last, the WVDE should clearly define which section of Policy 8200 applies to LEAs for ESSER-related purchases and for purchases made in the future under potentially similar circumstances. The response is WVDE reported that it will submit revisions to Policy 8200 to the West Virginia Board of Education for approval with a timeline to achieve an effective date of July 1st, 2024 to address the following. The requirements that LEAs use vendors appropriately licensed with the state of West Virginia, to clearly define emergency procurement procedures and adding annual professional development requirements for all Board of Education staff authorized to conduct procurement tasks within the school system, which will include all information recommended in numbers 4 through 8. That was a lot. Thank you for your time. This concludes my review, and we'll attempt to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate your presentation. We have questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the report. This is a lot, so your answers might be in here, but honestly, I don't know. Okay, my first question is, so it looks like most of this money has been spent. How much of it? Most, right?
Yeah.
Most has been spent, but not all completely, and I see that at the very beginning.
There you go.
How much of it has been reviewed? Because it looks like only a certain percentage, so.
All the way up to the ARP ESSER funds, where they came in, the funds came in and started coming in March of 2020. Yeah. Then they started the ESSER, that's called ESSER 1.
Yeah.
So so ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ARP, okay. So they are now finishing up the ESSER 2 funding. I forget which page.
Finishing up reviewing it?
Yes,
okay.
ESSER 2. And so ARP ESSER is coming up. So that 416 million, I think, that's left, they'll be reviewing upcoming.
Okay, because it looks
and I think there's 2 more reviews. I think, yeah, she's in. So 2 more cyclical monitoring reviews are upcoming.
And those reviews are not reviewing 100% of the purchase. They're just reviewing like a subset, or they're reviewing all the purchases. It's
a sample. They take, when the county submit to them, they're sending in 100% of the transaction activities for ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ARP. The Cyclical Monitoring Group, OFP, then pulls a sample from that. And from that sample, that's what's reviewed. And I think we have appendix, which one? Page 59, yeah. That kind of gives you an indication of just for ESSER 1, because that's what we honed in on.
Yeah.
Really because ESSER 2, the monitoring process was still ongoing. So on that appendix, you can see the percentage in some of all the counties of what was pulled.
Okay.
Some are close to 100.
Yeah.
Some are 3. Yeah.
Okay, so at no point will all of these purchases be reviewed by anyone. And
I mean, there's a representative here, but just based off what the answers that they provided us, there's the pull and sample.
Okay, and I'm slightly familiar with the Upshur County, but not fully. I thought in Upshur County, wasn't it, they pulled like 1% and there were so many problems that eventually led to the school board being taken over. Then we're 100% reviewed, because it seems like there's a massive problem, right? And we should be looking at everything. But that's not ever going to happen.
I'll let them answer that.
Okay, that's fine. And then just so we're all clear, and I'm not clear, what is this is probably a better question for the department. So I think I don't.
You can try.
I'm just trying to figure out the power structure, because it seems like that we don't have full control over what these LEAs, which are school boards, right? What they're spending. That's not our job, but then sometimes it is. I don't fully understand that.
You're talking about the DOE as oversight.
Well,
initially it's sent in, initially for ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ARP, there's an application that is submitted by the county boards that's reviewed and approved.
By the state?
Yes. Yeah.
And then the state plan was submitted to the feds?
Yes.
And the fed said, yeah, your plan looks
Yes,
good?
yes.
But then, so how did this happen? If the feds were like, it looks good, and the state was like, yours look good too. Everybody's like, we're on the right page, and then we're not.
Well, the one thing that we, drew from the state, we only looked at a small portion of the state plan. That's what we honed in on, which was the oversight. And in this case, it was really honed in on the cyclical monitoring. They had the ability, we just looked at the staff members. And I mean, it's a large amount of information that you're having to go through.
And how many people were looking at it?
In some instances, it's 1 to 5.
Per county?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So for example, in Logan County, let's use that as an example. One monitor was assigned to that county.
One monitor and
One
they
person.
work for Logan County?
No.
Or they work for
They
the
work
state?
for the state.
Okay.
Yeah, the Office of Federal Program, OFP, you see that
Okay.
acronym in there a lot?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the group or the team that is reviewing these financial transactions.
Okay. So they're reviewing that, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's all I've got for now. Thank you.
I have a couple questions. I'll start with one quick, easy one. Out of all the LEAs that were reviewed, it appears it's each county except Clay County, did I read? Why were they not reviewed? No answer as to why Clay County had no review? Okay. For the LEAs who misspent money, what were the consequences to those LEAs? Or are there any consequences to them?
Well, when they first find something, they will ask, this is probably better answered by the team, but what we would see was that they were requiring them to submit proper documentation. And then if not, they would then have some training in some instances, but they might be best suited to answer that particular question.
Okay, final question, and I may have more after all of it, but, the funds that they had to pay back, where does that money come from and who does it come from?
Yeah, I would have to answer that one. I was assuming it would be coming from the county board.
Which comes from the taxpayers?
That, I don't have the answer for that one, so sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Out of all these inappropriate expenditures, can you tell us a percentage of those that you think were through malfeasance versus just not knowing what to do?
Well, the only thing I can answer to that would be those that were just cited for improper purchasing, not following through with. I don't think anything went to the next step that we saw.
So we're pretty far down the road here. I mean, this is wrapping up.
September 24 is the deadline for
Right.
the last.
I'm curious, what can we do to get in front of the problem rather than look at the problem in the rearview mirror? It looks like educating people on the proper procedures are the right answers. Is that your thought?
Yes, sir.
So we perhaps put in place programs just without telling people how to go do it right.
I'm sorry.
So we perhaps put in place programs without telling people how to do it correctly.
They need to be educated in the correct way to follow through on that, for sure.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Chair. In following these processes and submitting for the funds, is there a significant difference that the school boards would undertake versus during doing normal requisitions? Is the policy significantly different than what they should be doing to take to purchase?
I might let them answer that one.
Thank you.
I know with municipal audits, for example, that findings are routinely referred to the local prosecuting agency for their review. Are any of these findings forwarded to any type of agency like that?
Not from us. Our recommendations just went strictly to the state level, to state DOE. But I would assume, I mean, some of the responses they've indicated that they're following up on the recommendations to the local level.
Thank you.
Other questions from the Senate? We have some maybe questions of the agency. Does anyone? We have a representative from the agency. If you come, feel free to stay where you're at. Go right ahead.
Hi, will you introduce yourself first?
Yes, my name is Melanie Perky. I'm the Federal Program Officer for the Department of Education.
So do you run the whole department and all of these people that we're talking about that do the reviews?
I run the Division for Federal Programs, yes.
Okay. I guess first I would just like to give you an opportunity to speak.
You want to ask? You're
Sure, yeah. What
I have a lot of
happened?
questions.
Yeah, what happened?
Well, first let me explain, you talked about the funding came in rounds.
Yes.
So we monitor every fiscal year as it closes. So the first round of funding came at the end of the FY20 fiscal year. So that in the first year after we received the funds, that's the only funds that had any expenditures. That's why ESSER 1 was monitored by itself. And there's more information in this report because those monitoring reports were available in FY22 when they began to do the monitoring. And you can see from like page 29, the types of expenditures that were deemed, the procurement was not proper. You can look down through that list and see it's hand sanitizer.
Yeah.
It's technology. It's the kinds of things, if you think back to 2020, 2021, I think school systems were in a panic of, we found a vendor who can supply this, we're gonna buy it. Because people all over the country were having trouble buying masks, hand sanitizers, even computers. And the first round of ESSER funding was $86 million. It was not a huge amount of money at that time for the types of needs that they had. Many counties only had 2 or 3 transactions out of all that money because they purchased laptops and iPads. Some counties, that's all they got out of that money. So, there were very few transactions. It was mostly spent before the school year began in 2020. Some of them didn't even receive some of their computers until later in the year because of the microchip issues and back orders. So, the first round of money was not as high risk because we knew the types of things they had to order and they had to buy, and the money was limited at $86 million. In the spring of 2021 is when the second round of funding came.
Okay, can we just stop on the first round? So the biggest issue with the first round was that they were purchasing things from vendors that were not allowable.
Yeah, they didn't have appropriate bids. They didn't have their 3 bids for items, and they didn't purchase from registered vendors.
And those are things that are normal purchasing procedures that they would have had otherwise. So
Yes.
they should have known better, quite frankly.
Yes, and our policy doesn't have a precise emergency purchasing section.
Okay,
They have to actually ask for waivers and so forth, and they didn't ask for those waivers. So
okay.
then their procurement, even though it would seem emergency, it was not under any emergency rules.
Because they don't have emergency rules.
Right.
Is that something that
That we're
you all
gonna
are
change in the
considering
policy.
putting in emergency rules?
Yes.
Okay, okay.
Okay.
So the second round.
So then the second round came in the spring of 21. So and that was about $360 million. So, we're talking about 3 times, a little more than 4 times what the original was. And that's when we realized that now we've purchased the computers, we're moving out of needing masks and so forth. So now we have some more substantial money. And we increased the monitoring, but there again, they did not start spending that money until they were into the FY22 fiscal year, which means we didn't monitor that money until FY22 closed. So, the monitoring doesn't occur until the fiscal year ends, which means you don't catch it as it's happening.
And that's just you decided not to do that?
That's just how auditing and monitoring works.
Okay.
We start with their audit report from their independent auditor.
Uh-huh.
And we review their audit report and look for any findings that occurred that their auditor found. And then we start pulling transactions ourselves and looking at those.
So did you have results from the ESSER 1 monitoring as ESSER 2 was happening?
As they were spending, we were doing the ESSER 1 monitoring as they started to spend on ESSER 2.
But did you have the results of it then?
Well,
To
we
be
do
like,
it-
hey,
But we do it as the year goes by. We don't do all 50 counties at
Okay.
once. We schedule them throughout the school year. So, by the midterm, we have about half of the counties done by January. So, it sort of accumulates throughout the year.
And was there any pausing to be like, we need to fix some stuff?
We sent out some, we saw some things that looked like unallowable types of expenses, and we sent some advisory guidance out about much spending on certain types of things. Congress put this money out there, and Congress put the purposes of the money, so all of the things you can spend it on is dictated by Congress.
Right.
We just reminded them of those sorts of issues.
Okay, and then ESER two, is that monitoring is not complete yet, or it is?
We monitor every fiscal year, so we have
Okay.
completed one fiscal year monitoring on that, and we're already in the process of the second fiscal year that they've had those funds to
Okay,
spend.
and are we seeing the same issues where it's vendors that aren't registered, or are we seeing completely different issues?
Well, since the reports have come out, they are, they're fixing the issue. I will say on the issue of the vendors, we have had meetings with counties and we've talked with them. One of our issues we're trying to figure out is, as a state agency, we do our purchasing through OASIS and we can check vendors through OASIS. Counties do not use OASIS. They are trying to use the Secretary of State's website, but they do not have access to enough information to determine if the vendor they're using may be registered or not. And I say that in the sense of they may be purchasing something from Walmart. And every Walmart is its own entity, and they can't check at the FEIN number. So there's a level of detail that they don't have access to at the Secretary of State that we're going to have to work out a process for them to be able to do that and check down to the.
And they're supposed to use vendors that are registered with the Secretary of State?
Yes, according to state law, which we had not checked and it was not clear in our policy prior to this audit.
So they're supposed to use, let me just make sure I'm clear, they're supposed to use vendors registered with the Secretary of State, which that information is only in OASIS, but they don't have access to know.
It's on the Secretary of State's website, but not in the level of detail that they need to ascertain. The Secretary of State may have 50 Walmarts that are registered, and they can't see the FEIN number to match up that their Walmart is registered.
So they have no way of knowing.
Right.
Okay. We are absolutely setting them up for failure. Okay. A bigger question, they do their own spending. What's the Department of Education's role in that? And what sort of power do you have when their spending is inadequate? I know with Upshur, that seems like a very extreme case that the state had to come in and literally take over the Board of Education. So day to day, what is the role and what power do you have over their spending?
Our responsibility in accepting the grant from the federal government is to monitor that they're using it for the appropriate purposes and adhering to the procurement rules. And, first we look at, was the expense allowable based on the purpose of the money? If the expense was allowable, but there was a procurement issue, they didn't get their bids, or they didn't purchase from a registered vendor, we give them a finding or a recommendation for fixing it, and we make them give us a corrective action plan. If we find that it was not allowable, then we recoup the funds.
If they have them. Yeah.
Well, we recoup the funds.
Okay.
If for ESER one, because it's expired, we will, they will have to pay it back with county money. If it's on a fund like ESER two, which when we monitored it the first time, they still had access to those funds, we basically recoup the funds because they spent it on something that was not allowable, but it goes back into their account so they can get access to use it again on something that is allowable. So from the federal standpoint, their issue is if it's not allowable, you can't spend the money, we're going to get it back. If you didn't follow procurement, then we're going to do some corrective action and work with you to fix your procurement problems.
Okay, so they put off the money to the states, and so the state is responsible for this grant at the end of the day, even though we're not the ones doing the spending, it's the local authorities doing it. Is that right?
Right. The state agency is responsible for monitoring them and pushing them into corrective action when they're doing something incorrect.
Okay, so at the end of the day, we're on the hook, and then you guys have to get the money from the LEAs. Okay, that's all I've got for now.
Okay.
Okay. Short, we have to move on.
Just a couple questions that didn't get answered.
Thank you.
So real quick, do you know why Clay County was not reviewed?
They were in the process of a special circumstances review at the same time. And so the person that went on the on-site did the monitoring then, and the report was not on the website at the time that this report was completed. So it was a timing issue. It has been completed.
Have they had misspending also?
I would have to go back and specifically look at that report to answer that question, but it's on a website that's public. He says, and this is one of the person on the staff. Yeah, their issue was that they didn't supply the documentation we needed to do the review, which was why we went on the special circumstances review to be on site and pull the documentation. But they did not have any misspending of the funds.
And then on the spending of the funds, those that have to be paid back, you said it comes from the county money. So where does that county money? It comes from the taxpayers are ultimately responsible for paying back the county boards of the LEA's misspending of money goes back on we the people.
Yeah, on the County Board of Education funds, which comes from state aid formulas and levy funds.
And there's no consequences to them when we have to pay for that, other than they get retrained.
Well, or they don't have those funds to spend on the other things they would spend them on.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. I'd like to thank our presenters for this time. Like your presentation on the registration of homeowners association. Then executive director of the Homeowners Association, I'd like to
Hello, everyone. We're Homeowners Voice.
Executive director.
My name is Kathy Knight. I'm Chair of Homeowners Voice. This is Daniel Bennett, the CEO. And we are delighted to present to you about this interesting problem. And I will turn it over to Daniel.
Thank you. I'm Daniel Bennett, Executive Director of Homeowners Voice. And I want to thank Senate President Craig Blair for having invited us and you too, Chair, and thank Carl Fletcher for his help with talking about this and many of you who we've talked to in the past. At Homeowners Voice, we've heard from homeowners across West Virginia about problems they're having with their HOA boards. I'm not talking about the petty stuff. I'm not talking, but what I'm talking about is fixing their streets. Sudden assessments in the thousands for work that should have been saved up for. Stories like a treasurer who can't get the president to turn over the bank statements. What we have is a problem here in West Virginia with road boards. So when we've met with many of you, the first question is often, how big a problem is this for West Virginia? And we have to say, we don't know. Where this problem really becomes an issue, again, not for color of paint, but these homeowners associations govern our neighborhoods quite often, from collecting levies that can turn into liens, to running elections and meetings to determine how the roads, sewage, water supply, and storm management is handled in many cases. But no one knows how many HOAs there are. The PSC, Public Service Commission, does not know all the HOAs that handle the services they oversee. And the Department of Highways does not know the status of all the private roads throughout the state that are managed by HOAs. And the problems keep coming. And again, we're not talking about the small petty problems that HOAs often have. We're talking about homeowners' property rights that can be violated by HOA boards. The HOAs sometimes don't do due diligence and make sure that they're carrying insurance for the common elements. And home values can plummet when realtors won't show homes where there are rogue or defunct HOAs. You asked us, how big a problem is this? We talked to the Secretary of State's office. They don't know because they can't be sure that everybody's registered with them. It's not a requirement to register with the Secretary of State. And furthermore, there does not seem to be a legal definition in the West Virginia Code that allows us to ever know how many there are. We've been hearing throughout the state from homeowners here at Homeowners Voice, but we know that you've been hearing the same horror stories we've been hearing. We're also aware that there are some who come say, hey, Maryland does it right. Well, they have a big bureaucracy there. Or some people just are so upset they come here and scream. We need to do something. But the thing is, in West Virginia, we have a very unique situation. So we're going to need a unique response probably. We have roads that are governed by the states in our counties, but many of the other roads in our counties in the unincorporated areas are governed by many of these HOAs in common. Here in West Virginia, we have the highest homeownership in the nation, a wonderful thing. And we have a great opportunity for growth in our state if we can get this under manageable. So we've come up with 3 easy steps. First, let's legally define these HOAs, maybe call them land use associations or organizations, and then require each and every one of them to complete a simple accountability form yearly. And then finally, third step, we can finally do something once we actually have our hands around this problem, where we have a legally defined understanding what HOAs or land use organizations are, and we can get the facts. How many roads? Do they have master insurance policy? Are there big problems with their roads? And when there are defunct ones, we can start looking into that as well. So we're working closely with you to come up with legislative language to do this. We think the best place to put this form, and we've been talking with the Secretary of State's office, is to have them, much like they do for people who take the bar, make sure that they're keeping up with their malpractice fees. They get, the Secretary of State asks them the question. So we think the Secretary of State is probably the best place to put this yearly form on. I don't believe that's going to cost them very much money. Matter of fact, I gave out peanuts here because that's going to be the total cost, which they can probably recoup with a small fee. And with this, that yearly report will be able to come back to you in a year or two, along with the Secretary of State's office, and tell you for the first time how many HOAs there are in your counties and your districts. We'll be able to see whether or not the property taxes were or weren't collected and how uniformly they were collected on the common elements in these HOAs. We couldn't get an answer from any of the assessors or any of the county commissions. Find out if they have property management people to help them, and finally get a copy of their legal documents, many of which do not get filed by the county clerks in a timely way. So that's really why we're here at Homeowners Voice, to ask you to help you to finally get your hands around this problem And Kathy Knight, our chair, is one of the most knowledgeable people in the state about these issues. And if you have any questions, I'm happy for her to take them.
Do we have any questions for Glenn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
So full disclosure, I'm on at least my second or third time around on an HOA board. I'll have to admit, I live in Hampshire County, probably not as smart as the folks further east. And for some reason, I don't think we have a problem. We have a reserve study, we pay our insurance bills, we seem to be doing all the things that you want us to do. So I'm not sure what's the problem we're trying to solve. I'll start with that. But I'd like to know if your organization has any group of homeowners associations or others that you're actually representing, or you're just a group of loosely affiliated individuals.
We're a 501c4. We're a 501c4.
Do you have any HOAs that are a member of your organization?
Individually or collectively?
As an organization? My HOA never heard of you.
That's correct. We represent homeowners, not HOAs. We've
How many homeowners
represented,
do you represent?
we have talked with hundreds of homeowners.
How many do you
We
represent?
don't represent a set
So you
amount.
don't have a number?
No, we don't have an exact number, but we have talked with people all across the state. The state attorney general's office has referred people to us when they have problems. And we're a new organization. We started
So
a year ago and have been all across the state talking to people about this.
are you aware of any other organizations out there that might help homeowners associations that are trying to do it right?
Yes,
Do you think they're not doing their job, if you would call it a job?
That is a tricky question and one that I'm going to handle as tactfully as possible.
A little louder, please.
That is what I'm going to handle as tactful as possible. Many years ago, I was part of a group that is now a different name, okay? And they basically, we had the plan that we would become a chapter with CAI. And that did not happen for whatever reason. Most states have, and there are 22 states around us that we've looked at, and most of them have a chapter with CAI.
Okay,
See-
can we speed this up? I know there's a lot of questions we gotta ask.
Oh, okay. Answer is yes and no.
Okay, well then let's move on. One of your issues is road maintenance.
Correct.
Who's gonna pay for those roads if you have your way, so to speak, that zombie and other type HOAs go out? Because talking with my highway department folks, they got their hands full now. They do not need extra roads. My HOA has 27 miles of roads. They're all dirt. We seem to do a pretty decent job keeping them up.
Correct. However, not everybody's created equal. In West Virginia, we are very,
So who's paying for it? Will the taxpayers be paying for that then?
absolutely not. Right now, in the code,
So
in
it's
the
not
West,
the HOA, it's not the taxpayer who will pay for it.
in the West Virginia code,
If it's not the taxpayer, and it's not the HOA, who's paying for it?
in the West Virginia code, it is allowed for the people to be assessed either by the county or that they create a
So-
road maintenance association.
So the
under-
taxpayer would pay for it.
The people who live on the road will be assessed.
How would the county just assess the people who live on that road?
It's in the West Virginia code that, in 711.
I don't think that would work actually, in practicality. So either the road is gonna end up being totally abandoned, and nobody maintains it, or the HOA continues to maintain the road, or the taxpayer is gonna pay for it, right?
Under no circumstances would we recommend that taxpayers pay for it. The people who live on the road who signed the deed that said that they're responsible for
Boy, I
paying
gotta
it.
put
those
you in touch with some folks
situations.
in my district then,
Okay,
because they would love to get somebody to do their roads, and it's not happening.
okay.
one of the things I think we are kind of missing the point on is some of these zombie HOAs probably shouldn't have been HOAs in the first place. And what do we do with them? And we don't even know how many there are. So when you don't know the depth and the breadth of a problem, the first step as a logical business type person, is to find out what your market audience looks like. You have got to find out how big the problem is.
And it sounds like you're working on that right now. I'll give you one final question if I could. I just want to clarify, like you said, there's no requirement to register with the Secretary of State. But I think it's true that actually all businesses in West Virginia are required to register with the Secretary of State. And more accurate statement would be that some of those organizations don't have accurate information.
I agree with that. However, you really need to go back to the premise that it's not mandatory, which it is not.
It's not mandatory to register with the Secretary of State with a
mandatory.
business license in West Virginia?
Not for HOAs.
HOAs.
It's bizarre. They've told us they can't give us an accurate number because they can't force HOAs to operate that. They can be associations that are loosely thing, and that would be wonderful if they were able to do that. That's essentially what we're trying to do with this proposed legislation, is finally make sure that we have a definition and that people who claim to be HOAs do have to be registered with the Secretary of State. That is a large part of the fix we're talking about.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Excellent, Senator.
Yeah, just from reconnaissance, I appreciate you being here. I live in an HOA. It's not perfect. Nobody loves their HOA. I'm just not sure we need police for the HOA. And so I would just be interested in seeing what the specific proposals are and being able to work through those.
Sure.
The idea of an extra layer of bureaucracy or a layer of really anything. I mean, homeowners have the ability to police their HOA. I think that process is in place. And so, but I'm interested, I appreciate you being here.
Okay.
I'm interested in seeing what you're working on and what your proposals might be.
Excuse me. As far as policing their own HOA, if they don't police their HOA, there really is no, at this point in time, no downside to them not doing that. HOAs are kind of on their own honor system in the state of West Virginia. We have been referred to as the wild, wild west of HOAs because a lot of stuff goes. And your HOA is only as good as that board of directors currently sitting in that position. One of the things we are going to propose is that it become mandatory for the Secretary of State, you must file. Let's get a handle on where we've got people. What kind of HOA are they? Are they really an HOA? If they're not an HOA, Secretary of State has code that basically says you do X, Y, and Z and you can dissolve it, make it go away. Then you've got HOAs that are tied in with the Orphan Road Act. You've got some that are doing a good job, some that are doing a terrible job, but there's no ramification for all this craziness going on. For example, the person that took the money from the HOA and put it in their bank account for safekeeping, that kind of thing is absurd. And we have to get a handle on what is an HOA first. Two, how many of them are there? And then once we know that, then we can figure out how many rogue have we got? How many zombies have we got? How big is this problem? And it may not be as big as we think it is. The AG's office has us on referral status and we talk to people just very loosely because there's no hard data out there. And it's crazy to sit here in a public forum and say, we don't know, because nobody knows. There is no data. Some of the data that's out there is questionable at best. So we need to get a handle on this. That's step one.
So what, I guess my final question is, so what's the motivation behind the project? I mean, why this?
Why now?
Why do this? Why are you doing this project? I guess what's the motivation behind it?
We've had people from the AG's office. The AG can't deal with HOAs under their consumer protection, generally speaking. And so when people have these problems, they've been coming to us. We've been speaking to them, and Kathy has decades of experience in this area. nobody has answers. We can't wrap our hands around it when the AG can't deal with it, the Secretary of State can't force them to register. We don't know how big the problem is, so we can't even make a recommendation to you for what to do. We certainly don't want to go Maryland style or lots of, making people, HOAs do what they don't want to do. But right now, essentially, all they can do is hope that they can find a lawyer to sue their neighbors. And it doesn't seem like the best solution, but that's really all there is, it seems, here in West Virginia. So before we can answer the questions of what to do, we need you to help define what an HOA is in law. And then they'll be forced, as the gentleman asked, to have the Secretary of State have a list of all of them. We would love that. That would be a great start.
Okay, just in the interest of time, we have time, we're going to come back and let you ask your questions of the presenters. I know some of us have other meetings that we have to be at, and I'd like to get the last presentation in. So, thank you for your presentation. This time, can we have a presentation on SB 656, verifying legal employment status of workers and governmental agencies?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of both committees.
State your name and position for the record.
Sure. My name is Christian Walensky. This is Andrew Good. We're both with Numbers USA, which is a national advocacy organization based in Washington, D.C. We exist to empower voters to hopefully achieve a better immigration policy nationally. But we're also trying to get involved in the states as well, just because of the current gridlock that exists in Washington, D.C. So as most of you know, for the past 2.5 years, the United States has experienced and continues to experience one of the worst border crises in history. Since February 2021, Border Patrol agents and Customs Border Protection officers have encountered nearly 7.6 million individuals who tried to enter the country without authorization. More than 5.6 million of them were apprehended after crossing the border illegally, while the rest attempted to enter the country through a port of entry without authorization. In September of 2023, the most recent month with official numbers, more than 340,000 individuals attempted to enter the United States without authorization, setting a new monthly record and demonstrating that there's no end in sight to the ongoing crisis. Reports from this weekend indicate that new large caravans of illegal migrants are making their way through Central America en route to the US-Mexico border. In addition, Border Patrol reports approximately 1.6 million gotaways. These are individuals who, through use of cameras, sensors, drones, and other equipment, are known to have crossed the border illegally, but were able to avoid Border Patrol officers. We know nothing about these individuals or where they went after they entered the country. Lastly, more than 850,000 individuals overstayed a visa in 2022. These are people who first entered the country legally, whether on a tourist visa, business visa, temporary work visa, or student visa, and failed to leave the country once their visa expired. In dealing with the 7.6 million encounters along the southern and northern borders over the last 2.5 years, prior to June of this year, approximately 2.5 million of them were subject to Title 42 removal. This is the COVID era policy that denied entry to unauthorized individuals to prevent the spread of the disease. The remaining 5 million individuals were either put into expedited removal proceedings, claimed asylum, or granted parole. Unfortunately, we don't know how many fall into which of those three groups, because the current administration has not provided the public with those numbers. But we know that most individuals who enter, either claimed asylum or received parole, have been released into the United States with either a notice to appear in court or a notice to report to an Immigration and Customs Enforcement office. The ongoing border crisis is putting tremendous stress on states, counties, cities, and towns. New York City's Mayor Eric Adams has been vocal about the overwhelming number of illegal border crossers who have made their way to the Big Apple. Massachusetts has declared a state of emergency over the crisis, just to note a few. These two examples show that even states and local municipalities that are located thousands of miles away from the US-Mexico border are feeling the effects. So what has Congress in Washington, D.C. done? In May of this year, the House of Representatives passed H.R. 2, the Secure the Border Act. H.R. 2 would address the border crisis by reforming the asylum system to reduce the number of fraudulent claims, limiting the executive branch's use of parole to only instances where Congress intended, and requiring employers across the country to use the E-Verify system to prevent the hiring of illegal border crossers. including a number of other reforms aimed at ending the current border crisis and preventing future border surges. Senate leadership has prevented H.R. 2 from coming to the floor. However, it was offered as an amendment to the debt ceiling legislation in June, where it was defeated. House leadership attempted to attach H.R. 2 to a continuing resolution about a month ago that would have funded the federal government, but that effort stalled. Meanwhile, the administration has done little to discourage the continued massive flow of illegal migrants to the U.S.-Mexico border, other than to create new paths for paroling illegal border crossers into the country and to ask Congress for more money to process and release them even faster. So with Congress's inaction, what can the states do to protect themselves and their citizens? Well, we've seen border states like Texas and Arizona take a more active role in stopping illegal entries, but their impact has been insignificant. I think the best action a state can take is to require its employers to use the E-Verify system to ensure that illegal border crossers who aren't authorized to work can't get jobs in the state. E-Verify would have two significant impacts. First, it would ensure that all new jobs only go to authorized workers. Second, it would discourage illegal aliens from making their way to West Virginia, which puts additional stresses on schools, hospitals, and other public services. E-Verify is an easy-to-use online tool authorized by Congress in the late 1990s and administered by the Department of Homeland Security. Essentially, it's an extension of the I-9 form that employers are already required to complete for all new hires. In most cases, employers simply take the information from the I-9 form and enter it into the E-Verify system. In a matter of seconds, the system provides either a confirmation that the new hire is authorized to work in the U.S. or a tentative non-confirmation with further instructions. A number of states already have E-Verify laws in place. For example, Arizona, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, North Carolina, and South Carolina have laws requiring all employers and state contractors to use E-Verify. And just this year, Florida passed legislation requiring most employers to use E-Verify. Utah, Nebraska, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Indiana also require state contractors and agencies to use E-Verify. And in nearby Pennsylvania, state contractors for public works projects are required to use E-Verify, and just a few years ago, the state expanded it to include most construction employers across the state. Now, I'd like to thank Chairman Woodrum and Chairman Phillips and all the members of the committee for unanimously passing SB 656 during the last legislative session. That legislation would have required private businesses and state contractors to use E-Verify. It's similar to the laws in several of those aforementioned states. But let me just give you an idea of what has happened since the close of the spring session. Since April, the Department of Homeland Security has encountered more than 1.5 million illegal migrants along the southern border. Add to that hundreds of thousands of gotaways that evaded apprehension. Now is the time for West Virginia to protect its citizens and future residents by passing E-Verify. Just to put that number a little bit into perspective, that's 1.5 million encounters over just the last 6 months. On average, we bring in about 1 million new legal immigrants each and every year. So in just 6 months, we've surpassed the number of people that we bring in through the legal processes. As I mentioned earlier, the E-Verify system is easy to use for employers, and those that currently use it love it. According to customer satisfaction surveys, 88% of employers are satisfied with the system overall. Just to compare, the average customer service satisfaction score for all products administered by the federal government is only 63%. So E-Verify is one of the top, if not the top system administered by the feds. 98.34% of all individuals who were run through E-Verify last year were instantly confirmed. Just to put that another way, less than 2% of cases receive a tentative non-confirmation, demonstrating that the simple act of employers using the system deters illegal aliens from even applying for the jobs in the first place. As of this summer, more than 1 million employers nationwide are using E-Verify at more than 2.4 million hiring sites. And in the past year, nearly 50 million new hires have been run through the system. Just to reiterate, there's no end in sight to the ongoing border crisis, but West Virginia can insulate its residents by passing E-Verify legislation passed by the House and Senate committees, similar to the legislation passed by the House and Senate committees on government organization during the last legislative session. And on that, happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
No questions, Zach.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for taking the time to be here today. We appreciate it. Obviously, the immigration issue is a multifaceted problem. There's a lot of moving parts. In your opinion, if we don't go through E-Verify, could you tell me who would benefit the most?
Well, it would be I think two groups of people. First, the people who are in the country illegally and aren't authorized to work because they can obtain jobs. And then second, it would be the employers that hire them that are then, in my opinion, unfairly competing, have an advantage over those employers that are abiding by federal law, which discourages the hiring of makes it illegal to hire people who are unauthorized to work. So they actually have an unfair competitive advantage, those employers. So those would be the ones benefiting, the unscrupulous employers as well as the people in the country illegally and unauthorized to work.
Do you have an average cost that would, for employers to implement E-Verify?
It's a free system to use. So in most instances, like with our organization, the person who handles our HR just created a login system or a login for themselves on E-Verify. They log in each time we hire a new person and they run the person through. So it's free. There are some organizations out there, there are some for-profit companies out there that will do it on behalf of an employer if they find that to be easier. But in most cases, it's just HR professionals. And again, it's a free system administered by the Department of Homeland Security within the federal government.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you being here today. You mentioned, I think the term you mentioned was discourage undocumented workers from coming to West Virginia if E-Verify is in place. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, what we have seen in other states that have passed mandatory E-Verify laws, most notably Arizona, which was the first one to do it, and then Florida more recently, was that people who were living in the state illegally and working in the state illegally ended up leaving. And those are studies from, for example, the one in Arizona was conducted by the Federal Reserve down in Texas. So they did that study. So it actually shows that once these states have passed E-Verify laws, that people within their state who are here illegally and unauthorized to work to end up leaving the state.
And I just want to understand the process a little bit. So as it relates to this bill, every agency in the state or political subdivision, let's just say municipality or county, once they collect the information on the I-9,
Right.
specific types here of identification.
Right.
They then take that information that they collect on that I-9 and they enter that into the database. Is that, do I understand that correctly?
It can be even easier than that. You're right. In most cases, people present their social security card and their driver's license. They can also present a passport, or they can, if they're a legal immigrant authorized to work here in the United States, they can show their work authorization card, or they can show a green card. So they only have to show that one single document rather than the two. But in most cases, they show a driver's license and they show their social security card. All you need to do in the E-Verify system in most cases is just name, date of birth, and social security number, and it'll instantly tell you whether they're authorized to work in the US.
So for the state, that each agency, as part of their hiring practice, will just include this, is that correct?
Correct.
And so.
And they're already required to collect it, so.
So they would, each agency would come up with their own login, and then some employee would have to enter that information. I mean, what kind of burden do you think this is on the agency, and what kind of administrative work or cost could be associated with the agency having to do it?
Right. So in almost every instance, I can't put a percentage on it, but again, 98% of more than 98% of the people run through E-Verify get an automatic or get an instant confirmation that they're authorized to work. In those cases, in the hiring process usually involves the individual files the I-9 form while the HR person makes a photocopy of their driver's license and social security card while they're completing the form. At that time, they can also just log into their E-Verify system and punch in the information to get the confirmation.
So that sounds like that would be the preferred way to do that.
Correct, and that's the way we do it within our organization. So it shouldn't take, now there are some instances where you have company mergers or things like that, and all of a sudden you have to then run massive quantities of people through an E-Verify system. For example, if you're a federal contractor, you're already required to use E-Verify. So let's say a West Virginia company were to win a federal contract, they may have to run all of their employees through E-Verify, or all the employees that are going to be working on that contract would have to get run through. So there might be a bit of a cost of doing business or some time that it would be needed for the HR person to run those people through. But for the most part, when you're hiring, you know, one person every couple of days or weeks or months or years, it's not too much of a burden, if any, on the employer.
Very quickly, Mr. Chairman, how many other states you mentioned?
So there are 21 states in total that have something in place, whether through law or executive order.
Okay.
So there are 7, I believe, with full requirements like SB 656.
Okay.
That passed through the committees last year.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Just real quick question. So there are 21 states who do this already.
Yes,
And so we're talking about folks who are illegally here and also not authorized to work here.
correct.
Meaning that if they are processed through the system and they
talk who has an interest in forcing the HARP Act back in or anything like that. We just want to know what's going on so we can actually address it.
And I agree with the Senator. Just to me, it's a private contractual situation. When you enter into these covenants and things, when you purchase these properties, I'm just trying to find an area where the state would be able to play a part of that. Well, listening to your presentation, I'm having a hard time finding where the state can come in other than making them register with the Secretary of State's office. I know a friend of mine lives in an HOA, wasn't pleased, the roads are not maintained. He ran for the board of the HOA and got elected, and it's affecting change in this HOA. So I'm just trying to figure out where your policies are going to fall on legislative interaction or involvement in this issue. Other than making them register with the Secretary of State.
Well, not just register, but start yearly reporting saying if they have a reserve fund or if they have a master insurance
But you're
policy.
asking for the state to have some kind of enforcement mechanism, is that correct?
Only to make sure that they register and fill out the yearly
What the
report.
state will be if, these people have this money, but they're not using it as the HOA or the.
Currently, they can sue, private actions allowed. Now they'll at least know what the situation is.
But your proposal or what you're hoping for has no state involvement in trying to enforce these covenants of the HOA.
No. We want to give the homeowners the opportunity to know the information. We can come back once we know how big a problem it is and say, this is the extent of it, but we want to make sure homeowners have homeowners association boards that actually do the job they're supposed to, just like their counties are supposed to, if they do something wrong, the state can step in. There should be some enforcement at some point, I think, if the Department of Revenue says that they're not doing what they should be doing, or the tax assessor says that they're not paying the property taxes, they should be doing that, but they can currently do that now. I don't know why they're not, but I think once we get our hands around it, like we have a census, this is a census of these things that govern, in some cases, an important part of our neighborhoods.
I'm just concerned about slippery slope of getting the legislature involved in private contractual situations involved, concerned about.
I agree, I am too.
They function, and not meaning to interrupt, but they function as a mock municipality, quasi-municipality, pick your word, as their own standalone government agency within their boundaries. That is good and bad. And we have to be very vigilant because we are about the only state that doesn't have some type of umbrella. If you're in trouble as an HOA homeowner, you can go to the Attorney General's office or the state auditor or the Secretary of State. Somebody somewhere is going to help you and tell you what you can do besides getting a private attorney, and that's a nightmare. I've been through that this last year. I have tried to get a private attorney who will take on an HOA. That opens up Pandora's box. Folks go, oh, we'll represent an HOA. We won't represent an individual against an HOA, unless you have a war chest of approximately 50,000. Now, the problem with that is, what are you going to get if you sue your HOA? Because some of them don't even have errors and omission insurance, so basically you're ending up suing your neighbors, which makes you very unpopular. I live in a flying community. That tells you right there, that's high in real estate as a general rule. People are living with their airplanes. They had a special assessment. They hit us with 350,000 out of the blue. As of right now, we're still missing 48,000. Nobody's bothered to explain to us where it magically evaporated to. They will not give us a bill, and this is an example, will not give us a paid in full bill for the paving company that had to redo the runway. It's a mess. There is no place to go other than to get a private attorney involved in the process. There has to be some kind of help somewhere on some level. And it starts with, what is an HOA? How many are there? Are they rogue? Are they zombie? And we can figure that out from the paperwork pretty quick. If they've never ever filed and they don't even know what the term reserve is or master insurance, they've got a problem. They probably shouldn't have even been an HOA. They could possibly have been a co-op. And they throw money in the hat at the annual barbecue. You know, cousin so-and-so 2 doors down plows for that little association, one road, as he's dropping his plow going to other sections. And they raise $200 to plow a couple times a year. They're happy. They have no other common ground. Do they really need to be an HOA? They're not acting like it. They're not filing. Their annual is a barbecue. Their notes are written on the back of a napkin. Okay? So it ties, because real estate.
I don't mean to cut you off, went over.
Yeah.
I've probably got more questions. That's, my thing is, I understand it's not desirable to secure an attorney for situations like this. I can appreciate that. But I'm just struggling as a legislator, trying to figure out where a state role would be in this, what the process and the problems that you're having. I'm trying to limit government, not expand it. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. That's the reason I have just a couple of these questions on what your intent of any type of legislation you would want to see. Would it have some kind of enforcement mechanism attached to it by the state? Or there would be a state agency that would come in and enforce the hand of the HOA. And it sounds like that's kind of where you're going with it, or otherwise we wouldn't need to deal at all.
Right now, we're asking just to have what is now a voluntary be made a necessary filing with the Secretary of State.
Right.
And just to find out what's going on. And when these, in a sense, governments, local governments that govern our neighborhoods, when they actually own the roads and the PSC.
I push back on it. They're not local government in the traditional sense of government.
Oh, sure. They're quasi.
Do people agree to that governance?
Of course. And the PSC does not know necessarily who's dealing with the water, who's dealing with the sewage.
Just to understand, I don't mean to cut you off, these other folks need to speak, but so you're just wanting the Secretary of State's office to be, or have these HOAs to register with the Secretary of State's office, and that's it?
With a yearly report, yes. Just asking some simple questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. Do either of you all sit on the board of your HOA?
I have in the past.
Have in the past?
Yes.
But you don't presently now?
No, I do not.
And when you all say "we," how many people is actively in your group? I know you're five, you said you're 501c4, correct?
That's correct.
But how many members of your group do you have? How many people are working with you for the same?
We're a new group. Kathy's been working on these issues for a couple decades. I've been talking to folks. We've been taking the AG's referrals for the past year. And so we've talked to several hundred homeowners about various issues, but we don't have a large membership yet, no.
Who's funding or behind the funding for this?
We are.
And our friends and family.
Yeah. We believe in this so much that we have to have a starting point. Every project has a beginning start point. And until you get that start point going, you are not going to get anywhere. How do you legislate something if you need to legislate it without a definition? How do you legislate something that doesn't have a data point that's trustworthy as to the magnitude of the problem? So we began asking these questions about a year and a half ago, and we kept saying, we must be looking in the wrong place. There has to be a data set. This is not possible. You know what? It's really possible. There's no data set.
Okay, but you're saying you don't want us to make a legislative rule, but you want us to make a legislative rule to make the Secretary of State make somebody do something that hasn't never been done.
Well, it's now voluntary. We want to make that necessary, and then also to collect a little bit of information yearly from ones that register with the Secretary of State with a little bit of information. And just to let you know, the reason why we exist as an organization is because when I looked around and met up with Kathy and some other people, we realized nobody represents homeowners down here, and we're not a special interest. We just own homes, and we've been finding that they're huge problems. So
But sir, if you're, even if, let's say for some reason we would decide to order the Secretary of State to do what you're asking.
Yeah.
A zombie HMO is one that's not working. They don't have to report nothing.
But if they're still an HOA, then they ought to be, if they file documents someplace, then some poor real
And they
estate.
wouldn't be a zombie.
No, they could be a zombie and just not follow their documents. We're finding all sorts of evidence of that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Not seeing any, I have a question. Are you familiar with the Uniform Common Interest Ownership Act?
Intimately.
Okay, you find it to be a good law or not?
I find it to be a great law. However, it is a fraction of what is actually was put out there recommended for the states. Having said that, I'm not implying you need to do anything more than what the statute already has. However, and I had this debate with someone else a couple of weeks ago, there is no provision within the Uniform Code that says we will regulate bad acting HOAs or defunct HOAs. That is missing from that,
From the
code,
from any code.
from any code. And somebody somewhere has to sort of, at the endpoint, the ultimate endpoint, at some point, somebody is going to have the ability to help people, particularly those HOAs who've gone absolutely rogue. Because there's no help. Where are the help assigned by the AG's office right now?
If you have a problem with a contractor, with someone who's working on your house, something goes wrong, you can go to the Attorney General's office, file a complaint, and they'll start a process. Unless you say HOA, in which case you don't. So it is something where businesses are regulated, where HOAs, the uniform code is not include those things, and there are other provisions outside of it that keep those agencies from doing what they do with other businesses even.
You see county commissions having a role in where you're wanting to go?
We met with them. Tucker County graciously offered to be the work space model. And their big thing was, we need this, because they were horrified when the president of the Tucker County Commission looked around the room and said, "County clerk, how many HOAs do we have?" They said, "Can't answer that, Mike." He pointed to the assessor, "How many HOAs? Are they paying tax?" Can't answer either of those questions. Sheriff, you're in charge of tax and notification. How many HOAs do we have? No idea, sir. The Tucker County commissioners were in favor of having something at a commissioner level, but they didn't really want to own the whole problem. So that pretty much sums it up, doesn't it?
I would just add one thing, which is here in West Virginia, in unincorporated areas of counties, which is huge, and we want to have more growth and all of that. The counties don't have any say over the roads, even if they're called county roads, and the HOAs are in charge of theirs. So I think that the counties, and when we've talked to them, you know, in Berkeley County, for example, I think they would like to have some amount of understanding of what's going on in their county, which, like Tucker, no one seems to have an understanding of what is a growing, large thing, and then our home values and our property rights can't be respected until we know what these HOAs are doing in our state. So that's the hope.
Have any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you very much,
Thank you for
Chair.
having
Do you
us.
have any other business to come before the committee? Seeing none, look to the co-chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move we adjourn.
Motion's on the record. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Ayes have it. We are adjourned.